excited about this meeting, and we want to get to know you because this is, Andrew had requested that this be more of a community share. So we're going to ask really quickly that you share your names, pronouns, program that you're in, including if you're just a community member. We love having you here. And then psychedelic of the moment.
And I'm Android, he droid pronouns. And, I'm always kind of a tried and true LSD guy, but currently I think my psychedelics moment are grief and love. Thanks everybody for being here. This is really exciting. I think you might have reached out maybe like a month ago, and yeah, we did entitle this to be a Fireside chat, so I don't know if that's horrific or hilarious. It is what it is.
There's all kinds of jokes.
Yeah, it's a lot of jokes, a lot of cosmic jokes happening. About me, I was born here in Boulder community, third generation, Boulder, Colorado. My ancestry here, both my grandfather and great-grandfather sold drugs and booze here. We started the Jones Drug on the Hill. If anyone's old enough to remember the Jones Drug Pharmacy. The Joneses have sold drugs in Boulder we've been druggists for 104 years. My grandfather started North Boulder Liquor right after Prohibition. He started it, the North Broadway Liquor. That was right like 1 foot over the county line of where you're allowed to sell liquor. So the Joneses were deeply invested in altering the consciousness of Boulder, Colorado. It's a proud tradition that I do my best to uphold in my own way.
Appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking, Tina might have asked me if I'd been to Naropa before. I have one memory of being here at Naropa, and I think I was 6 years old. I had my first best friend. I went to school at Sacred Heart of Jesus Christ, so I was a Catholic altar boy. But before that, when I was in preschool, I had one best friend named Sam Upton, and he was a Buddhist. And he was my first and kind of like only friend. And I was invited over. It was my first, I'd hung out with him at his house before, but this was the first like sleepover ever at another person's house. And for whatever reason, Brad and Mindy, his parents, decided that before the sleepover that they were going to take Sam and the family to, my memory's pretty foggy, but it was some type of thing at Naropa at night, some meditation or chanting or something in one of the auditoriums. And I don't think that was like, I think I was just freaked out about spending the night, and I remember I was crying, and Mindy and Sam were like, "What's wrong? Like, what's wrong, Andy?" And I'm like, "There's sand in my eyes." So sand in my eyes was like a running joke for the next 3 decades. Whenever I was crying, they didn't ask me if I had sand in my eyes. So that's my brief Naropa anecdote. And this is it's an interesting time for me. Interesting for what a time to be alive for all of us, but particularly I find myself in one of the most interesting chapters of my life. And I feel that to give people the backstory, to almost 2 weeks ago, 13 days ago, I grew up here, and then I went out to live in, I traveled, did a lot of traveling, lived in a lot of different places, but in 2013 my father passed away, and so I immediately came back here to Colorado to be with my mom. We've got like 15 acres in the foothills just right outside of, kind of on the border of Lyons and Longmont down 36. And so it's like a big property for her to handle on her own. So I came back here and I moved here and moved in to our family house, and there's a barn on the property. It's like a 40 by 20 foot, 2-story cedar barn that my father, he built the first one in 1977. That one burned down in 2008, and I inherited it in 2013. And so it has been my, I say it's like my studio for the past 10 years, but I feel that it really for me, it really represented, it's the main foundation of everything that I do creatively as a territory and a structure Anyone that had been inside of it could attest to that. It was, if anything, could symbolize the externalization of my own inner mind. It was like the magic and the madness of this studio. It's where I kept all of the things in life that made me feel safe. All my investments, a whole body of artwork, sketchbooks, probably like 20 years of digital files and whatnot. I'm a tool guy, all my tools, just all the things, all the stuff. All my favorite sacred stuff was in this one place, and it was my favorite place to just navigate this mystery of consciousness that we call being on Earth. Very ceremonial place. And 13 days ago, I wake up, and I have 3 children. We live in Linesville, about 1.5 miles from the barn. And with 3 kids, they're 5, 4, and 1, so I wake up pretty early and kind of do the whole small kids breakfast, putting socks on, morning ritual amazingness. And it had snowed 6 inches the night before, so I went out to shovel we have a kind of a long cement vertical driveway, so I got my headphones on, started blasting my Slayer. And I don't always listen to Slayer, and shovel snow, but when I was raging the Slayers, shoveling snow with my headphones at full blast, living my best life, and it was around 8, maybe 8:15, and at a certain point I sense a disturbance in the forest, and I look up, and my wife she's got one of the babies like in her arms, the 1-year-old, and she's waving and screaming at me. And I look up, and I can make eye contact, and I can almost see the words coming out of her mouth as my headphones comes off, and she's like, "Barn's on fire." I get chills just like thinking about that, and so I get in my Ford and I race down there at the most extreme speed that my truck was capable of going, and even at like maybe half a mile away, as I turn a corner, just leaving Lyons, I can see. When you said barn's on fire, it's like maybe the corner's on fire, or maybe something's on, maybe something outside of it. I have no details, but I turn a corner and I can see this violent black tower of smoke like over the hill, and that's when I first know that like this is not just a pedestrian type of. This is a real deal. 2 minutes later, I'm there, and I think it was around 8:20 was when I had the first, at least like time-stamped video, and the whole barn is completely engulfed in flames. I mean, fire coming out of the structure is still standing. It was actually a beautiful moment to see it because it was still like in its full structure. Fire just coming out of every window and every door, and I can't get within like 15 feet without like searing heat and pain. Like there's no running in to grab a thing or just the photo out. Like I'm just there, just witnessing. And because the barn burned in 2008, I'd always had this fear in me of the barn. It's always been like one of my greatest sort of material fears of a thing to lose, especially with how it also represents, I mean, the things that it represented on so many different levels. I've always terrified to think about that happening, and so to be there and just be present with the unfolding of what I felt was like one of my kind of greatest material nightmares in just full technicolor there. I've never experienced anything really quite like that. I've gone through grief and tragedy. I mentioned like the worst thing that ever happened was outside of my father dying or something happening to families or loved ones. This is probably the worst thing that I think could happen to me on that Maslow scale. And my initial reaction was that God hath smited me. I did something terrible, like maybe like I wasn't living my full, 1,000 dark thoughts rush in, but when you're trying to make some sense out of something that you never wanted to imagine happening, and then slowly like I think there's like a cascade of just realizing, taking for granted like all of the eggs that I had in this one basket, and it's gone. I mean, there was no, at that point there was nothing as salvageable. You know, we haven't gone through and done our treasure hunting yet, but the heat of these flames that collapsed in on itself. And when the firefighters, who were amazing, got there, they were just focused on making sure it didn't spread to the neighboring house. And so I just kind of got to sit there with like 50, maybe 20 firefighters just watching this. You know, they wanted to save their water to make sure it didn't spread. So it wasn't as if that fire was being put out at all. It was just kind of being contained. And I was pretty convinced that was just the worst thing that could ever happen to me in that moment. And I feel like I can't ever remember feeling so naked. Feelings that I felt naked. I felt there's a lot of, I went through, so there used to be 5, now there's 7 stages of grief. So the shock, anger, denial, that's kind of my entryway into the grief process. A lot of guilt, a lot of like, how did I not have these files backed up? I have 3 fireproof safes that were outside the barn because they were too heavy to put inside the barn with nothing in them. You know, like it's like the iron, like all the things I coulda, shoulda, woulda. So there's like that. I'm still kind of running around. I also have, so I'm so conscious of fire. I have a whole system for wildland fires. I've got trash pumps. I've got 500 feet of fireman hose. I've got a full fireman's outfit, respirator, gloves. I've got 75 fire extinguishers. I get these things at auction. Funny question. All the fire gear is burning inside the bar. You know, it's like, I'm a bit of a, some might say, prepper survivalist. All the things I wanted to survive the apocalypse are in the barn. All the weapons, all the munitions exploding, like all these things. And it's just, so yeah, I was there. I was on site for 3 hours. At a certain point, I realized that I'm just harassing firemen and I'm not helping the situation at all. I take kickboxing lessons. I took kickboxing classes for an hour. Highly recommend. There's no silver bullet, but it's a great antidote to like the anger stage of grief, is hitting a heavy bag with hooks for an hour. And yeah, so that's the day 1. Day 2 was also pretty terrible. It's still going in. There's a lot of, there's more of the bartering in the day 2. But for the first time, I've always considered myself to be like I'm a provider. My father was a provider, his father, like the Joneses, like we know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to manifest, we know how to like support and vision and take care of our families and like our teams, like we've always done that. And it was the realization that like the tools that I depended on for that power, that ability, all those tools were gone. I love fixing broken things. All the things that I used to fix things are gone. And I'm the broken thing at the center of this tragedy. And I also assumed that like this is my legacy too. Like I'm the guy that had like his entire body of work, his Smithsonian pieces, this whole life burnt, and I'm going to be just like a warning, cautionary tale. I was pretty convinced that like it was like this big, like you've been playing this game of life for 45 years, and like you landed on like the failure box, and it's really dark. I was there for a while, and then the next day, we had one of my neighbors, who's a friend of mine on social media. He posted some photos, and so word kind of started spreading out, and I had a lot of like close people come and call and reach out, and a few of them that reached out were people that had experience and skills with doing fundraising. And aside from, I think, if I were to write them out on a list, like underneath losing the body of your entire body of work and all your favorite stuff, under of greatest fears, probably the next fear would be having to ask for help. I'm not a guy that asks people for help. I'm terrified about asking people for help. this, I feel like that what this level of loss, at the sudden level of like loss and grief, because it's so personal, like I realized that like the sketchbooks and the paintings and the drawings, I had 8 flat files like overflowing with originals and drawings that I had been doing. All the drawings I had done with my children were upstairs in the barn. And to have so much concentrated, like drawings represent, like my love language is gifts of appreciation, and so drawing and an act of service. And so for me, drawing has been an act of service and an act of love. It's a way that I communicate with the world. I feel it's the greatest gift that I can be of value and service to people. And just the amount of hours and years of concentrated, like my crystallized consciousness that I just saw rising into the air. A term that I've kind of fallen on that I like, because I don't like saying like everything was burned or destroyed or it's ashes, is for me in this material world, outside of just individual relationships with people, the barn as a structure, it represented like my greatest, the most intricate, complicated quantum entanglement of my life, like the stories that were woven into there, the things that came out of there, the investment I had into the space. And when a quantum entanglement becomes entangled, the word is it goes through a state of decoherence. And the decoherence is the loss and the release of information back into the environment. And so now I like to refer to it as the barn. It just decohered. All that energy, all that potential was released back into the environment. And because it contains so much of my life force, I remember, the first day, it felt like part of me had died. And it was kind of like I was almost like witnessing part of my own death. And it wasn't that I died, but I feel that part of being, for me, the journey of being an artist and creating this huge body of work it's like I've been having to reinvestigate a lot of my strategies. I think one of the strategies to try to cheat, they say you die twice. You die once physically, and you die when people forget you and don't remember you anymore. And this body of work was my hedge towards a bit like a futile attempt at immortality, that I could die, but these pieces will live on. My children will inherit the Smithsonian piece, like all these things. And when to see all of that decohering, there was it felt like, I feel the next day I felt like I was a ghost. It was just like haunting my life. And it was a life that I was really not inspired to be living in that moment. And so that's day one. And there's day two. Day two, I'm on the phone a lot, I'm doing a lot of calls. And my friend David Walk took the initiative to create a fundraiser. And up until this point, like I've never done a fundraiser, I've never asked for help. I considered fundraisers like panhandling on the internet, and like I said, I thought it was like my pride that was stopping me from that. I think so. The next day was, we were working on the fundraiser, and I went to my therapist. I see a therapist, maybe I've been seeing him like once a month for 6 months. And I see him because my wife it makes my wife really happy that I see a therapist. Up to that point, I thought I was perfect. Yeah, not perfect, but I could see the preventative maintenance in it, but there were a lot of times where it's like, I'm not getting any breakthroughs here, It's just like, I like talking to this guy. It's cool having someone that I trust to tell my problems to, so I don't have to burden my friends, but like, we're not getting anywhere. We did address we actually did address like my attachment to material things and how those things make me safe. So he was familiar with that things in me were an issue. And when I got into his office, I just ran into the door crying and just like laid down on his couch, and I remember he was so shocked because like, I know for him it was like, finally, I've got something to work with, something to work with now, you know? And it was really through his reflection. The thing that I was really wrestling with was like, so this disaster happened, and now I'm going to be begging all my friends online for help. And I only even reached the point of having to do that because of surrendering to the fact that like I am totally effed here. Like I've got 3 kids, I've got a wife, I've got an amazing team, I've got these people that count on me, and like there's no rabbit in my hat that I can pull out to make this any better. And it was being at that like low point, so I had come to the point where I realized I needed to ask for help. And what I was working on with him that day was just trying to examine like what are the things in me that like, what happened that made me feel that asking for help was not okay. And part of my origin story, at 11 I had 11 was my first, I'd say, if this would become sort of a material, real-time like ego death trip. At 11 I had my first physical, psychological ego death trip. And for no explainable reason, I developed like a blood clot in my brain, and I had to have like a major brain surgery at 11. And it's the same sort of thing. It went from like 0 to 60. One day I'm a kid, next day I can't make sentences, the next day I'm in the children's hospital with like a catheter and my head shaved, and I'm going through like an alien abduction. And so they had to make this scar and pull my face off. And I've always known that was a big trauma for me, but part of me is like, I don't always visit that trauma. But this situation, it narrowed my focus where I realized it was really time to look at that. And I remember, as traumatic and painful and horrible as that nightmare was, I remember the recovery process. I remember being in, coming out of, I mean, it's a big long story, but I remember coming to after the surgery and like looking in a mirror, and like I was a cute little 11-year-old, and I've got a shaved head and this caterpillar of a scar with black stitches, and my face is so, when they pull your face off and put it back on, it doesn't really fit perfectly again, and I couldn't even like recognize myself. I think I like broke the, it sounds dramatic, I like to think that I broke the mirror, I threw the mirror, but I could remember the people that came, classmates and their parents that would come to the hospital, and I realize now they had the best intentions. They were really trying to show love and support, but I was a very perceptive kid, and I could see just the reflex of the terror in their eyes when they would look at me, and they were just seeing themselves, their fears in me, like what if this happened to my kid, and then they would catch themselves and they would be really sweet. But I never forgot what that felt like. And I remember like going to Crossroads Mall after a few months of recovery, the first time going out in public and seeing people point and make comments, and that 11-year-old made a decision back then that, well, first I didn't trust the world anymore. The world didn't make sense to me. All the rules I thought I operated by weren't. Mortality was on the table at 11, and my coping mechanism was retreating into the world of my art and the world of my sketchbooks, because that's what felt safe to me. At least I understood it. I understood how this world worked, and it really caused me to recoil from people. And that was really the core, I think, of, I thought I didn't want to ask for help because of like my ego, or I could do it by myself, but the core where that came from, I believe, was that childhood trauma. They say that, like, I'm a big like Gabor Mate fan. He says trauma isn't what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us. And inside, I made a decision that helps, I don't want help, and I really don't like the world anymore. And what happened inside of me is I disconnected from my authentic self and formed like armor around myself. And I mean, I'd have to say that, looking at the next like 20 years, like realizing that making art as a form of love, and you know, I think I loved art because it gave me a really good reason to be by myself. When I was 15, 16, I discovered marijuana and psychedelics, and I found another really amazing thing I could do by myself. And then I combined psychedelics and making art, and jackpot, you know, that's pretty much career trajectory locked. And there's just more of this, you know, all these understandings didn't happen at once, but it was just like this lotus flower, just kind of, once I got to that core and worked kind of upwards and backwards, the other realization made was just I think we all have strategies for how we're giving and receiving love. And I realized that art, I've come to also understand this too. I think that being a visual artist, I think it's one of the safest ways to give and receive love. It's so much easier for me to give love by focusing my energy into a thing. And one of the motivations for becoming a great artist and putting the tens of thousands of hours into a piece, and I feel that one of the reasons I work so hard on a piece is I want to make it so good that it's impossible for you to reject it, because I don't want to be rejected. And so for me, art was indirectly, not consciously, I mean, this is a strategy that developed over decades. It was so much easier for me to put myself into art and have that out there and receive love through this appendix, this satellite, and to give my love and receive it through that, because it was safe, because I didn't have to put myself out there. And so here I am in a position where all of the things, all of the art that I depended on for giving and receiving love is gone, and I'm at just like the lowest, most like morally soul bankrupt, helpless type of position. I get to the point where making a video and talking into a camera and begging the people that care about me to help me. We do this fundraiser and we launch it, and I don't know what we were up to, Chelsea, like the first day. I think we set the goal at like $250,000. And we hit that, I think we hit that goal in
3 days max?
3 days.
Wow.
3 days. And it's, you know, like that's, if we want to just use like money and shekels as like a metric of love. But the calls, the messages, I'm also, I stopped kind of engaging dynamically with social media maybe 5 or 6 years ago, so all the posts and tweets, that's all. My amazing team does that, because I just found it was a real drain on my consciousness and kind of a bummer. So I don't read comments. Over the last week, I've read thousands and thousands of comments of people. I never knew it was possible to receive this much love. I could never have imagined what receiving this much love feels like. And the irony of receiving all this love only when the main strategy I had for giving and receiving love is violently decohered from me. And yeah, it's just been the best, worst weeks of like my entire life. And it's I think I've been doing a lot of writing too, because like I don't have any of my toys anymore, so I do a lot of like texting, writing, and like it's amazing. Like sometimes I'll just respond to somebody randomly, and then there's like a whole monologue comes out. I'm like, okay, I'll copy that over there. But the process has allowed me to do a lot of kind of contextualizing, because I don't even write the posts. I'm super dyslexic, but I've been doing a lot of writing, and just even today, just realizing. As terrible as everything as traumatic and disruptive as the fire has been, and as tragic, and it creeps up on me. I wake up in the morning sometimes and I forget that the barn's burned, and I have to kind of relive it in that microsecond of consciousness all over again. But then now I also get to relive, like, oh, and you have a unbelievable amount of people that love the shit out of you. But yeah, as terrible as losing all these things are, I see now that, like, what a tragedy it would have been if I didn't lose the barn and I went the rest of my life without knowing that there was so much love out there, that I had created too many structures and scaffolding to protect myself from, because there was an 11-year-old me that made a decision that it wasn't safe for people to love me, and I didn't want to feel their love anymore. So it's been a week. It's been a big week. Been a big week for us over here. And yeah, I think the other thing too, that what my therapist told me that I felt really made a huge difference too in the unfolding of this too, is like, when I asked him, it's like, how do you ask for help? It was so foreign to me. It's like, give me the help for dummies. Like, how does this work when you ask people for? I'm so transactional as an artist, or, you know, and I always want to under-promise, over-deliver, and I want to put out. I do love people. I do love doing good things. I love that the things that I do add value to people, and I've always wanted that to be an asymmetrical relationship where I'm adding more value than I'm taking. Otherwise, you're like a vampire, and nobody wants to be a vampire. So you always do that. That's like been my tenet. But when I asked him, like, how does this work? You know, like, what do I do? Like, when people give, and he's just like, he's like, there is a gift in giving, and all you need. He said, first, your only job right now is to cry this week, which is easy. And he's like, but your gift to them is your vulnerability. And that was another thing I think I never. Good luck finding a video of me on the internet crying or being vulnerable over the past like 30 years. And I wasn't intentionally not trying to do. It's interesting, I'm very vulnerable in my art, in the expression. I go to extremely vulnerable places individually, on ayahuasca, on 5-MeO, on DMT. Like the art of, my strategy for a large body of my work, whether it be LSD or ketamine or a combination of those two things together, I'd like to think that as an artist, like I'm a devotee of truth. Not always a practitioner of it, but I love the truth. And as an artist, I want to be able to use my skills and my capabilities and these gifts and these tools to try to convey that truth. And I felt that psychedelics were often a pretty amazing vehicle. At least even as LSD, if anything else, I'd always consider just like, it's just a bullshit detector. You can't, it's very hard to lie to myself on a high dose of psychedelics, because all the lies that I've accumulated since the last time I did psychedelics like sneak up again. I have a habit of just like psychedelic psychological maintenance I need to do like every month. You know, it's like put a little sticker on the windows like, oh, it's been that many miles. Like, I've got to do acid again. You know, it's like the gremlins pop up and things happen. So I practice a lot of. I feel like to make the art that I do. I've gotten to a practice of being extremely vulnerable with myself and my Wacom and my pen. In my barn, I'm great at being vulnerable there, but I've never had an opportunity or need to be that vulnerable in front of people. And that's what my therapist was telling me. He's like, when you came in crying, he's like, that was the greatest gift you could have given me, was that. And I was like, well, I've got a lot of tears to give people right now, so I've got a lot of that. But yeah, the lessons about the vulnerability, about gifting, about receiving, and just the shenanigans of these strategies that I've been employing to just navigate and figure out how to get through this life, and realizing that as much as those got me to this point, seeing all these dreams that I had decohere was so painful. But in the span of a week, 2 weeks, I can be comfortable. I wouldn't say I'm fully in acceptance yet. Like, we'll see. Like, check in with me like in a couple months when it's all the adrenaline of this like wears down, and I still am like, why don't I have my stuff? You know, I don't know. I can tell. Like, I feel like I'm in a really open place right now, and it's only a matter of time before I calcify into my introvert. You know, and I'm gonna try to just keep the heart open as much as possible. But to lose all the dreams that I thought that were so important to me, and now with the power of and the gift of receiving all this love, to now be able to be in front of people and tell you how excited I am about all the new dreams that this makes possible. I mean, it feels like it's a different, I feel like a different person. I'm still a lot of the same me, but I feel very different, and I'll never be able to perceive the world the way that I did before. And I feel that I have a cleaner perception of things. I feel like we're all very wired for love, and I feel like I had some miswiring going on. And yeah, it's just I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited I feel like the things that I've learned, because I've like I said, I've done a lot of ceremonies. I'm no slouch when it comes to like personal introspection of the things happening. But I feel like this was a kind of breakthrough that I could have been with David for the next 6 years, and I don't think we ever would have cracked this nut the way that this particular type of catastrophe did. And I'm excited for what comes next now. I'm excited to, the reason we wanted to still do this talk is because I'm excited to share this information. I've had the amount of artists that I've talked to that when I share this, that even just like the satellite appendix love strategy, the amount of reactions I've gotten of people realizing for the first time that they're doing this too is really encouraging. Because it's something that's like, it's something I've always understood too when it comes to making attempts at portraying a deeper truth, whether that be art or music or dance. I always find it very ironic that sometimes too, the more personal that you dig, it's like the deeper I can dig into my own individual psychology, the more unique I feel that whatever consequences or circumstance have created that thing, like the harder you dig down, even though it feels like it's just 100% your little snowflake of like trauma and realization, sometimes the more universal that truth can be to other people too, which is just a cool feature of humans, that we're like that sometimes, And yeah, and that's why we're still excited to do this talk, so I could share these things with other people, because I think it's pretty important stuff, good stuff. And also, it was funny that I talked to my friend Zavi. The first person I called, one of the first friends I called, was my buddy Zavi, because he also lost his studio in a fire in Ashland a few years ago. And he told me, he's like, yeah, Andrew, it's like you and I, we both won these Buddhist merit badges that we never asked for. So here we are in Naropa. Woo. That was a monologue, huh? Yikes.
Brought it right around.
Cool.
Dude, thank you so much for being so vulnerable with us.
Yeah, thanks for hearing. It feels good, you know? It's like, what was I so scared of? That's the thing, it's like the phantom of the things that you're so scared of. Like, why? I don't know. It's, you know, I have still more therapy sessions to figure it out. Like, to understand now how powerful vulnerability was. And I think that's when I read through, because I've been able to pressure check this, and this isn't just my own insights, it's also the insights and the reflections from thousands of comments. That's one of the things that, you know, a lot of the comments are like, I feel like I've been a fan for so many years, but I'm like seeing you for the first time. And to realize that I had kept such, a lot of it was professional too. It's like, I don't tweet, my policy has been like, you know, I sell my art, I'm not selling my politics, I'm not selling like the ideas that come out of my head. You know, I try to insulate a little bit. And obviously, I think moving forward, I'll find that balance between like vulnerability and TMI. But I've always known that I do have like the best fans. But I figured it was just a bunch of like just weirdos like, you know, like me that like art and drugs and tipper and whatever. You know, yeah, they're out there too. But yeah, I mean, I've never felt more connected. I've never felt more loved. I've never felt more connected to all the people that love me, and I've never felt more love for all the people that I'm connected to. You know, and like I think that's a big reason on what we're doing and why we're here. There's you guys know John Perry Barlow? Come on, they're Colorado. He was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead. Started the any Deadheads here? Terrapin Station, got a lot of. So he passed away. He was my former future ex-father-in-law, and I was watching a video of him the other day as a quote that he said, "We fight." He was talking about like why we're here, what we're doing here on this earth plane. He said, "We fight with our hearts in order for love to make sense. By not giving up and learning how to accept love from others, from other people, that we win that battle. And that is why we are here." And, you know, I've heard these words a lot. It's one of like, I have a whole, like I did have a framed like Barlow quote list on my wall. You know, to find ourselves worthy, to make ourselves open to the love we actually deserve. It's like, this is a quote I've read and listened to so many times, and it's like, and now it finally lands for me. That love forgives everything. Questions, comments, concerns? I'm here for you.
I want to share something with you. My name's Jessica. Hi.
Hi, Jessica.
I've been a fan of your art for a long time. I've actually, like, after seeing a video of you and your wife on your Facebook page that was shared, I thought to myself, this is the first time that I've seen this guy's face. I've been a fan of your art for a long time, and I never, even pictured the guy behind the art. And I'm just feeling a lot of gratitude right now for this talk, for you sharing your story, because now I feel like I'm really getting to know the guy behind the art that I've appreciated for years. And so I think if anything, I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable and using this as an opportunity for not only for us to learn about you, but to also bring forward what is difficult and what is vulnerable as a way to continue to heal. And that's what we all care about in the space as we're studying therapists and whatnot. So to witness you, I'm just in awe right now of what you brought. So thank you.
Thank
for that.
you. It's funny, I feel like when I look at all the artists that I admire, I'd say previous to this, and I kind of have the before the barn burnt version of me and the after the barn eco here burnt version of me. And I'd say out of all the artists that I did admire, I was always like so jealous of Banksy. You know? Not from like necessarily a body of work standpoint, but like the strategy of like nobody knowing who he was. And I always felt like, damn, it's like I was on Tribe and MySpace and I'm screwed. all these photos of me exist, I can never go back. And so I just kept trying to like peel that back and just like no exposure. And now I see the other. And like I think there is a balance. There's things I think about with like I'm excited to explore a relationship with the people that support me that's more open and more vulnerable. It feels great so far. Yeah.
Cool. Question over here.
I want to thank you for your speech tonight. It really speaks to me just where I am, and I think it's such a powerful lesson as to the gifts that you can offer just through your vulnerability, as you said, not only to those who have gone through the tragedy that you've recently gone through, but for others in general who also need to learn to be more vulnerable, and maybe even those who haven't yet come to that realization. But I find this particularly synchronous because after my dream work class last night, I wrote the question of, why do I find it necessary to push others away? And in asking that question, I received several dreams where ultimately the answer was that I'm afraid to push others away because I'm afraid of seeming lost. And rather than seeming lost or vulnerable, I prefer to seem like I have it all together at the expense of asking for help. So with you bringing in the importance of receiving love and asking for help, that just completely coincides with what I was even journaling before your speech began. So I thank you, and also just affirming your highest and best in this time, and also just I realize that what you've gone through is very painful. So affirming your highest and best.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think that's the other side too with fear too. It's I mentioned that it's also part of what is terrifying about asking for help is the fear of not getting the help too, of being rejected. That's why as an artist and all my artist friends, we make our art so awesome to make it impossible to reject. Like you might not like it, but you can't reject it because it's categorically really awesome and complicated. Like there's all these things going on. It might be over your head, but it's amazing. Yeah. And sometimes it's easier to just not ask, so you never have to find out if you'd be rejected or not. And that's kind of like that's just the universal thing. And yeah, love's a complicated thing. It's so easy and so simple and so complicated. The last major, before this breakthrough, the last breakthrough I had around love was probably 5 years ago. And it rhymes with this a lot. There's a lot of similarities. But the first breakthrough I had around the dysfunction I had with love was I felt that I think so maybe I'm around 40. It happened actually when Barlow had died, and I was actually watching these all these videos. He has like 25 TED Talks, and I was making this portrait of John, and I was just like, going through like all his digital archives he's got this internet pioneer, so he has a lot of content out there. And it was actually there's a TED Talk he gave where he tells his story about love forgives everything. And I was doing that, and I was actually getting I had the two of the most amazing energy healers I've ever met in my life, these two sisters. They were doing this energy work on me. And one of the breakthroughs I had was realizing that I had actually never really, I loved myself. I think that's as far as like reconnecting the heart wires, that's probably like, that's the main one, I think, for functioning successfully. If you've disconnected your wires and loving yourself, part of the reason I feel that I had such a prolific body of work and worked so hard was because I needed to create all of this art as a surrogate for that love too. And the emptiness that this surrogate was trying to fill was the disconnection of me loving myself, and so it could never be enough. Again, amazing source of inspiration to keep yourself motivated, not a great strategy for being a happy person. And I had only realized what really got me to accept and love myself was my daughter, Nova, my firstborn. So she's 6 years old now. And it was probably when she was like 1.5. So she's like, she's individuated herself enough as like a personality. And I had never loved anything in this whole world like I love my firstborn daughter. Like movie love, just like endless unconditional love. I'd never experienced that. And so she was pretty much like my most favorite conscious being in the world. And I loved her so much, and she was so cool. And it was when she loved me, I realized that when it's not just depending on you as a life support system, but like I could see that she loved me, and that's when I realized that if Nova loves me, then I'm actually worth loving myself. And that was like it's so interesting how you can go about in a certain pattern in a way, and it's just like it's like the fluttering of a butterfly wing that comes by, and you can realize, and that's what's exciting about therapy too, about trauma. Like Gabor says that too. It's like with trauma, you can't change the trauma that happened to you, but to change what you make of it and the meaning that you give it, and to make a decision to see where you zigged and zagged from your authentic self, and to make it and to recognize that and to make a decision to go back into that can be one session. I'm not a therapist, but it must be really exciting to have that possibility of having one session with a person and like they're never the same. It's almost like you're a psychedelic in itself. It's really a cool thing. That's very cool.
Yeah, I'm really stoked to hear about your experience with your therapist, because I think that we're people who want to help people, and the resistance that we maybe feel with other people, with our clients, can maybe be irritating and be like, I want to see progress, and like just to hear that like just developing that relationship sounded like it created this groundwork, this foundation for you to like really feel like you could really put it all out there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have done that if I was seeing a guy for the first time.
Totally.
Like, hi, this is my story. That wouldn't work. And I think that's something I've realized too with therapy. Like, say if there was, I'm not a therapist, but if what's important, important strategy I think would be when you create that foundation. It's kind of like, I guess part of it would be like, like I said, I'm really into the truth. Like I believe in an absolute truth, a natural law. Like there's things that are true regardless of whether we think they're true or not. Like it's pretty, not a super hard line on it, but like just a truth fan. What I realized when it comes to things like that is that it's really difficult to make someone see the truth if they're not ready to see it or they don't want to see it. I'd say it's almost nearly impossible.
And maybe even damaging to try to force it.
It could make it harder for them to see it later on. I think all you can really do is almost create like a nest and a scaffolding to like support them when they're ready to see that. Something that makes them feel safe, that lets them know that like you've been waiting for them. To embrace that. I think it's the same way. Same strategy with like demonic possession. I've done a lot of ceremonies and a lot of weird places, and I've done pilgrimages through South America and Central America, and like it's a real thing. I've seen like real people. I felt my own possession at one point, and it's the kind of thing, and I've had friends and people I've known that have possession might be, you can add your own adjective there. It's the kind of thing that I feel like something has to change inside them, that whether it's a trauma or it's something that makes them want to see that for themselves. Because when they do see that thing, it can be like if you're totally disconnected from the truth and you see the truth for the same time, it's probably gonna scare the shit out of you to see the truth. And I think that's when having a structure and having support and making them feel that they're safe and they're held in that place is kind of the most beneficial thing. You know, you can't drag them kicking and screaming into that. And I'm grateful my therapist was like he was a great guy. We had a lot of really good talks. He was really patient with me. But yeah, to know that and he's a heart guy too. It was, yeah, I felt very fortunate to be in such good hands that he had all the right answers when I needed them, you know, because when they need it, that's a really, you know, there's limited, I feel like there's limited windows that we're even receptive to new ideas and new answers, and we will naturally sometimes want to recoil back to where we are, and so you have to really take advantage of those rare windows and those opportunities.
Yeah, the timing can be just as important as the content.
Yeah, for sure.
It's funny because I've seen a lot of shows where you've done visuals at, and every time you come on for visuals, there's usually I'm on Psychedelics too, and there's a shift where I start getting all these downloads, and the heart opening that you're talking about right now of learning to love yourself and be vulnerable, that's what I've gotten out of these experiences watching you do visuals. So it's interesting how this is flipped around now.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy. That's a great report. I'm happy to hear that frequency was carried. I mean, I feel like most times when I'm doing visuals, depending on obviously the set and setting and the show and the music, but that's all for me. That would be an example of places where I've gotten into a ritual or a practice around vulnerability, when I'm doing visuals for Tipper at Red Rocks. It's a very vulnerable place. I'm putting myself out. I've got no net if something goes wrong or there's a glitch, or it's getting in. When I used to get in on stage and make live paintings, it was very vulnerable to be I'm just going to give you the best that I've got right now, and there's nothing else, this is it, you like it or you don't like it. So I think there is a level of vulnerability in when I'm doing performances and shows. And there's also once I get past the fear, because I still get nervous almost every show that I do, leading up to it. But once I'm in the flow, and it's also very vulnerable to be a central point of an entertaining experience on lots of psychedelics too. That there's a vulnerability that you never know if you're just going to lose it, or I've had some accidents in the past. But I feel that I'd like to think that what you're feeling too is once you kind of dive past the vulnerability, what I've always really strived to communicate I'm a very process oriented person, and when I'm making those visuals, or I'm in a flow state, or was in the barn in a deep place, and all the pistons are firing and everything is working, it's one of my favorite ways to be alive in the world. It's a time where I feel the most alive. I often feel that the experience, I'm really always trying to transmute that aliveness and that joy and that experience and infuse it into the work. The work that ends up, the pieces that come out from there, I've always felt like residue to me. The piece is finished when either the acid wears off, or I get bored of it, or I want to start something new. It's really this. I'm very much a pursuit pursuit guy, pursuit of the creative experience and the insights and the emotions that kind of unfold within that.
I'm curious about your artistic process and how psychedelics and creating art like interface. Are you doing like high doses to the point where you're like struggling to like do mechanical motions, or are you like scaling it back, or are you microdosing? Like enough to open up something, but you're still able to operate, or are you like doing high doses and getting visions and then following it up later? Like,
Awesome. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So, out of all the different varieties of psychedelic artists, I'm a method actor. I make art on high doses and low doses of psychedelics. And kind of inadvertently, I also have, I fall into I fall far on the spectrum of aphantasia, which means I don't have a visual imagination or like a mind's eye, so I can't close my eyes and picture my kids' faces or an apple, or it's just like this voidless, formless static. And yeah, another funny story, I didn't realize that until I was like already out of art school, and I was like, I think I was like 25 was the first time I realized that most of humanity has like avatar visuals going on in their head all the time. Imagine my surprise. So partially what I do is, what I feel that this is another one of these like, oh, and that's why I did all these things, kind of a realization. For me, I was always a drawer, and I still draw. I love paints. I got my first professional art job was drawing portraits. Non-professional art was drawing portraits of homeless people and runaway kids on Pearl Street when I was 16. And then I started realizing I could draw tourist kids and they would give me money. So that was my first like professional job. But when I got into the digital work, what I loved about it was the speed at which I could, because I'm very much, I have a traditional background. It's all based off of like understanding the dynamics of anatomy and composition, and it's very constructive. Like when I can use a pencil and paper to create things that I'm contextualizing, thinking of, because I build them out structurally. Like I know where the bones connect, and I know how to make forms, and I know how to color things in. And so what makes art thrilling for me is that I'm customer number one. That is my motivation for partially finishing these things, because I want to see where it goes and how it turns out. And so lots of the pieces that I start, I have no idea where I'm going on it. I know I have got a good container. I make a really good soundtrack, and I have maybe some really good acid, and we're just gonna like see where that, and Dharma Dragon comes out of that, like it's really, I work to cultivate, one element of this is decades of cultivating traditional art skills. Like I said, I used to dissect cadavers. I know anatomy, I know where the muscles insert and attach. I have a good understanding of color theory and composition. What I do, outside of not having a visual imagination, I feel like I have a highly attuned intuitive sense. Even most pieces start by listening to music, and sometimes I'll just use shapes and forms and try to sort of like my attempt at something kind of like, I try to sometimes just give form to sound, but I'm very attuned to like when I make a stroke, there's a feeling if that stroke like feels good or doesn't feel good. And so I just pursue, I'll lay down another like, and with digitally I can lay down really dynamic colors and shapes simultaneously. And I'm always just looking for a color and a combination of shapes that I've never seen before that makes me feel good. And so I just pursue that, and then because I don't have a mind's eye, which is, it's just to think that however, I see some people's face when I tell them I don't have imagination, just like, that's easy to imagine. You just imagine nothing. I have to imagine that you guys, like, it's you know what I mean? It's wild. It's wild. Anyway, outside of having a visual imagination, I feel like I also have developed a really strong sense of pareidolia, which is, looking at clouds and seeing dragons or tigers. So after a while of creating just a dynamic sort of landscapes of colors and shapes and forms, naturally I have a pretty well developed pareidolia. When I'm on LSD, it's like steroids for pareidolia. I can look at something and see something come out of it and like close my eyes and another thing comes out of it. And so I feel that the speed and efficiency, so it's a combination of, there's a muscle memory that even when I'm on I could be surfing a K-hole and my muscles still know form and structure and how to draw things to make them look real. And so you combine that with the incredible efficiency of digital tools that I can put down hundreds and thousands of pixels of colors and sizes and shapes and use 3D, and combining that with the psychedelics that enhance my visual pareidolia. In a way, I feel like that acid and technology and the skill base I have, it's almost like it is almost kind of a surrogate for what a visual imagination is. It's my best simulation of like what I think that is and I didn't do that because I was like, I want to see what imagination is. But that's how it works for me. And so a lot of the pieces, they develop along a certain type of a narrative. And based off the dosage that I'm doing, different things like may emerge sometimes. I'm not much of a I do microdose, but I don't microdose to like be creative. I microdose just for like the energetic feelings of it. But usually I sit down and I'm not like I don't sit in front of the computer like on a 10 strip, but I do realize that like if I want if I want to honor the moment, I do need to do like a significant amount of acid, like 1 or 2 or 3. I usually have a vial that I'm working with that I just kind of intuitively just know like this is how much I need right now. And sometimes I do way too much, and sometimes the worst is when you don't do enough. Like the dreaded underdose is the worst. So err on the side of caution. I'd say that probably the most, if I look back on, and it's also too, was like back in, I'd say like maybe between like 2005 to maybe 2000, maybe something shifted after like the 2012, 2005 to maybe like 2014. That's probably when I was like the most extreme psychedelic visual artist. Didn't have kids back then. I lived in a box truck with like solar panels and an Aeron chair inside of it as my studio, and drove around. And I developed this night rainbow art car just so I could go to festivals and do as much psychedelics as I wanted to and still make art, and like close the truck doors and just still be there, because I didn't like the vulnerability of being super high on stage all the time. I just felt like I wasn't reaching my full potential, having to hold back. The ketamine was really interesting. I got very deeply into ketamine for a while. Ketamine and acid, and sometimes Adderall, which I called Keterol. Ketamine was really fascinating because, I don't do ketamine in front of people or in public or socially. Maybe on a dance floor. I think it's a terrible drug for me. Interacting with human beings is horrible. It just does not work for me very much. I learned that lesson. But for example, for ketamine, I would do and this is not advice to anybody out there listening. This is just, it just works for me. It's not going to work for you this way. Maybe. The screen is as close to my face as possible on like an arm, and I have the Wacom underneath, and so all I'm seeing, and my keyboard is up here, so I'm as like immersed into a world as possible. And ideally I would have like the subwoofer like right behind me in the chair in my like fully Aeron like zero gravity chair, and I'm there because I want to make my hand, ultimately I want these to disappear, I want all the technology to disappear too. I want to be in that moment, and I'll have like a really good, I think back in the day I'd have like maybe like 3 hours of like, I don't know, like Cryptic Minds or like some like really deep, bassy, no lyrics curating the soundtrack was really important. And I would start with like a serious line, like no bumps, you know, like a K-hole line. And I would put the soundtrack on and I would do that line and I would just sit there and I would start. And then what happened for me is that it was the most immersive, creative way of experiencing the creative expression, because when you're doing that much ketamine, what I found what would happen is I would completely disassociate myself from the me and Andrew and my story and like who I am, or that voice in my head that's like, oh, this is good and this isn't good. Like, you know, all the machinations of the mind would be obliterated, and I would be in a place where I felt like it was just like pure creative expression. Like every stroke was going in a direction, and like, you know, I had the program memorized so much that it was so comfortable. Interesting story about ketamine, I don't know if this is true or not, Barlow told me this, is that one of the reasons they developed it was, I think World War II. One of the use cases was is they would put it into tanks, because before that they would have, I don't know, what would you do? What would be the pain? What would be like the opiate painkiller? Like if tanks are super valuable on the battlefield, and if you hit shrapnel and you're the tank driver, and a piece of shrapnel comes in and blows your leg off, and you eat a bunch of morphine, you might feel better, but you're still dead in a tank, and the tank's gone, and the asset is gone. They found with ketamine that if shrapnel went through your leg, they could put people in high amounts of ketamine to numb the pain, but they would still have the motor skills to like drive the tank back home. Fun fact. You know, so I could drive tanks or make psychedelic visual art with my wig on. And there were experiences when I would come out of it, like I would slowly come back. I always felt like I was going into this like foam, ethereal type place. There was a lot of like white within like the visuals. But there were times where I would like come back, slowly regain like my consciousness and just look at this like, where the F did this piece of art even like come from, you know? Don't recommend that a lot of the time, you know? Like I've gone through my channeling and way too many liabilities for that to be a career path, for sure, you know? It's like I'm excited about sharing and being open and vulnerable with people. I'm still pretty guarded when it comes to the energetic opening and vulnerability with all the entities that could have been hanging around my San Francisco warehouse at that moment. So the older I get, there's more discerning I am, the less I'm like playing Russian roulette with like all the disincarnated spirits and things. But you guys were in Naropa, so we can talk about stuff like that. You guys know, right? I'm not trying to indoctrinate anybody. There's super evil things out there, super evil shit that you don't want. And the evil stuff is like, when you're in psychedelics, you're open, you're easy pickings to those things. And what I found is, and some of the dark ones are amazing. They are amazing, and like the dark energy is, it feels like it's always there waiting to help you if you call upon it. It's like, it's probably right here, just like waiting for me to like not be loving anymore, you know? It's like, they're so easy, you know, they're a cheap date to get that, but when you're in it, it feels amazing. Amazing is the right word. It's mystical, you know. It's supernatural to when you connect with a consciousness that you know is not part of you, that's like outside of yourself. Like there's a thrillingness to it. But what I found is that the dark ones are just way too abundant and available all the time. But the higher ones, like the higher dimensional entities that I have had, a lot of times what I'd call like part of the philosophy around the barn. There's some photos on Instagram. I mean, I'm a big believer in set and setting, and like part of my strategy was the runway I call it the runway, which is like runway for spirit or runway for the muse. It's like you never know when it's going to happen. I can try to calculate and game the conditions that make it happen easier, but like all of the, like I don't put like things in drawers, like all of the brushes and the paints and the pencils, like everything there, everything's ready, everything's charged up, because when it hits, like when you can like throw your kite out there and your line and you catch like a higher dimensional, like positive creative force, it's just like watch out, like every second is precious. When I used to do in San Francisco, I was like, before I found the visionary art scene, which was only like 2005 or 6, I think. Before that, I was a closet psychedelic visionary artist, which meant I work for films and video games, and I just do lots of acid on the weekends and draw. I used to have these just embarrassing photos of it online, but gun bandoliers, they're the things you put they're elastic, and you put them on the back of like shotguns, and they'll hold like either shotgun shells or maybe like 12 like 308 like rifle calibers. And I would have all of those filled with pencils sharpened on both edges on both arms. When I got into I did this a lot, so I had it pretty dialed in. Why would you do that? Because when you catch one of those, that type of energy in that psychedelic state, the time that it takes to sharpen a pencil is excruciating. It is so painful. And they might just buzz off. They're like, they're impatient too, and you just have to like ride that all the way through. So pencil down, another pencil, another pencil, another pencil. I could make it through the peak of the wave with like 24 pencils. So yeah, it's wild stuff. So, but yeah, those types of energies, I feel like you really have to woo them, like they're not just going to come into anybody. Like all the muscle memory of traditional art, anatomy, perspective, form, all those things that I've entrained my body to do, it's like, I think of it like I just want to be like a race car for spirit, like I want, like they're not going to spend their time, on like a Ford Fiesta or like a Kia, like they're going to come down and they're going to experience like material reality like through an artist. They're very discerning. So I just try to make myself worthy as possible and hope. Yeah, but I think that answers what kind of drugs do you do? Do drugs and make art 101? But ideally too, the goal is like, I don't like, if I did realize in those raging extreme years that the amount of drugs I was consuming while making art was not a sustainable life path either. You sharpen the pencil, you can only sharpen the pencil at both ends for so long. A lot of it though, I feel that sometimes there's a lot of amazing insights that I've been able to, even like just little clever like tricks or things or combinations. There's a lot of things that I learned while on psychedelics that I can take out into my sober reality, because ultimately, like, I need to spend most of my time here. I choose to, because it's a lot, but yeah, it's cool. Like on LSD, it's like, as a digital artist, I tell people sometimes, some people ask me the question, I get a couple calls like this every once in a while. Well, I definitely got one call like this one time. And this guy that I'd met him at a technology conference somewhere in like LA. And I think at that point he hadn't done psychedelics, then he might have gone to Burning Man, then he did psychedelics. And he calls me, he's like, Andrew, I have a really important question. I get a lot of people that call me when they're super high. It's one of the pleasures of being me. It's like people call me when they're super high with a super important question to ask, and hopefully I just try to give them the right answer. It's like, oh, I'm really high right now. I just did acid in my apartment. He's like, I'm like, okay, cool. Breathe, we're here. I got you, man. What do you need? He's like, okay, I'm looking at all these psychedelic posters I have on my wall. And I've got like this poster, and I've got your Dharma dragon. I'm like, okay, what's your question? He's like, why why is the Dharma dragon talking to me?
You should ask the Dharma dragon.
Sweet.
Yeah. So I realized, my theory on that is that when I did the Dharma dragon, that was the 3-day binge in Portugal making that piece. That was probably the equivalent of like a 10-strip experience. I like when I'm making the pieces on high doses of acid. What I do see when I'm working digitally, working like Photoshop, layering types of programs, there is definitely a particular point in the experience where I'm seeing the pareidolia is where most pareidolia is like it's almost kind of the pareidolia is it's like a volumetric pareidolia. Like I'm seeing multiple 3-dimensional dimensions like within the portal of the monitor that I'm seeing. And part of the challenge and the reason that efficiency is so important is that I feel like I'm given this window into this other dimensional reality of this, whether it's, and sometimes it's even just like the languaging and the sigils and the types of shapes that I'm seeing. And I have this very narrow window of time where I can sort of etch that into silicon. And I have it's kind of like a tightrope where I have to get that information in to be, and it has to have a certain level of coherence before I'm not high anymore. Because if I don't finish it and the high wears off, sometimes it just looks like nonsense. It's like a deck of cards, like the whole thing collapses if I'm not able to fully articulate it enough to where a sober mind can translate that. And I'd like to think that I'm infusing a lot of that information in the experience, and when people take the psychedelics, then it's like a decoder ring, you know, and like it's like just adding water and it all comes back alive for them. That's my theory. But yeah, one more drug story though. I heard there were some DMT 5-MeO fans. How many people have seen Samskara here?
Multiple times.
Cool. Yeah, nice. I've seen it more than you guys have. Trust me. And I had seen it a lot, and I think this was 2000 and, I'm going to say 16 or 18 out at Burning Man. I've seen it so many times that I like know where I see all the mistakes. I see a lot of cool things, but I see like every pixel out of place, every time skip, every little glitch. I'm a huge fan of it, but I'm also it's my job to be somewhat critical of things. That's how we get better. And we were playing it out at Burning Man, and I think we're out at, must have been a year, maybe we were with like, I don't know, we were out at the 2 o'clock side. How many people have been to Burning Man? Cool. This party out in the desert. And we're at the edge of the party at the desert with this big dome, the same size as the Fisk Dome, more or less. And we've been playing it all weekend and just blowing all these people's minds. And it's like the Sunday, it might even be the Monday, you know, the party is over, and this is like it was even like the middle of the afternoon. And this is after we're going to show, I was just kind of doing my housekeeping, because it must have been like maybe early in the morning. It was kind of, the sun was already out. Some people have fallen asleep in the dome. I was just there to just kind of let everyone know this is the last Samskar we're showing at Burning Man this year. Thank you very much for coming, kind of a thing. And I sat down and I was like, oh, I'll watch it one more time. And another phenomenon that's been happening, I've noticed maybe 3 years prior to this, is that there's been a correlation between people seeing Samskara and excessive DMT smoke happening. So much so that at Symbiosis I had to designate, like, this is the DMT smoking section and this is the non-DMT smoking. You don't want to get like secondhand machine elves. Try to be a good host, be a responsible housekeeper. Anyway, I didn't understand it. I'm just like, I still do not really. DMT for me was the experience I had with it. None of them ever belonged on a dance floor or in public, but new generation, people find new things. So I was curious about where this new samskara DMT phenomenon was coming from. And I was there at the last show, and like many experiences like this mysterious, like half-naked, long-haired wook just like appears out of nowhere. It's like a wook tulpa might have just like manifested. And I don't know if he knows who I am or not. I assume he does because he's acting like he does. And he gives me this DMT vape pen, and I was just like, oh, it's like the last day of Burning Man. I'm totally just like opened and shattered, and like anything goes now. It's like no more boundaries. All boundaries are gone, like left on Friday, and I'm like, okay. 'Cause DMT usually freaks me out a lot. I'm not a big DMT guy all the time. And I'm like, how do you work this thing? He's like, you just sip it. You just take it. All right, I can do that. It's like a big bean bag. I'm there in the middle, and it starts and it rolls the credits and everything. And I take a couple sips of it, and then all of a sudden I realize that like the edges of the dome have like the boundaries of the dome have disappeared. And now it's feeling kind of boundless. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like I wasn't expecting that to happen. And like I take a bit more, and after like maybe like the 5th or 6th sip, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to realize like why this is a thing. I see where they're going with this. Okay, I'm still very much like in my head, like, okay, interesting. Like I get it now. Okay, not so bad. And then I'm feeling safer, so I'm taking like more and more, and then it didn't take it like a blast off amount at all, but I get to the place in it, which is kind of the peak where the Dharma Dragon image comes out, and it's always been not on DMT. It's always been one of my favorite parts of samskara, and incidentally, the true art behind samskara, as far as the animation and the visual effects of it. Beyond being inspired by art, it's mainly made by very non-psychedelic Russian Hare Krishnas in Thailand. So there's kind of, it's not like the way spirituality and psychedelic things are kind of intertwined is always really interesting. Anyway, Dharma Dragon comes down, and she comes out, and it's just in samskara, it's like this big face comes down, and like it's Dharma Dragon, but it is, and it's obviously like more visually like interesting and real, but the Dharma Dragon like comes out at me and just stares down at me and just gives me this look, and she's telepathic, her mouth isn't moving, but she's like telepathically like checking me out, and kind of a stern look, just like that kind of look like listen, I know you didn't expect this, and I know I'm like freaking your shit out right now, but the look in the voice was basically like, do you get it yet? Do you understand, like, what this is? Because at the same time, I'm critical of my own work, and I see the reaction people have to samskara, and I'm like, that's cool. Like, man, people really get something out of it. Like, what's going on? Like, what's a part of me? Like, I feel like I'm often like the last person that gets the joke. But in that moment, what she had communicated to me, and what I could the only way I could put it into words was this, like the aha I had at seeing an entity fully come into Dharma Dragon, fully address me individually, and like transmit a message to me. And the message that I got, and I had to get this before she went away, but the message was like, holy shit, we accidentally built a sock puppet for God to talk to people. Who knew? So yeah, God's sock puppet developer is proudly able to do stuff like that. So
awesome. Thank you,
fun
Andrew.
story. You're very welcome.
Dude, we're a little over time.
Oh, I bet you are. Yeah, no, I'm just
And
rambling.
Thank you so much. I want to ask just one last question. Doesn't have to be too long, but whatever you got for us.
I'll try not to ramble.
You shared so much about vulnerability and love and what you learned recently. If you had one piece of advice for artists or anyone out there struggling to be vulnerable, what would you say?
Well, I think I said it before, but man, I think the mantra of just that love forgives everything. because it does. You know, that's a pretty, no matter what you're afraid of, like, you can come back to that. Yeah, because it is as artists, we are trying to, if you're like me, your love language is making these gifts and making these things and sharing these things, and we like to think that our value is in the work that we do and the trappings of this calling and this profession. But sometimes what I've learned this week is that offering your authentic vulnerability to some people can be the greatest gift that you can give them too. It's a both and.
So don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah, don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help either.
Yeah, another hard one.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, just like your ability to throw that art out there has had such a profound impact. It might be coming from a biased place, as I'm one of those strange, tipper-loving psychedelic kids. But at the same time, like it's what brought me into this room here, and I think a lot of people here, I can't speak for everyone, but just the impact that that's also had on the psychedelic therapy community, and yeah, dancing until the sunrise at Tipper shows to your art has like had such a huge impact on that ability for me to feel comfortable being vulnerable as a person, and I know a lot of the people that I find in my personal circles. So
Yeah, and I think it's the value of community is the other huge lesson. From being such a solo, lone wolf provider, introvert type, to realize that there was this, I mean, I love people and I love supporting the community, but to see that there was such a huge resource that was there. I mean, I know that I've been working to cultivate it, but for it to have my back at the moment in my life where I needed it the most, and it's the perception of thinking that I had all this value and safety in things, and things are gone, and the real gift and the real value I had was the love from the community around me. And yeah, just realizing that, like, fire doesn't burn love.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed
My pleasure.
yeah.